Welcome to How Is This Legal? Where in each episode we crack open the books to find outlandish legislation and regulations that make you ask, how is this legal? If you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your family and friends. Here to break down what these laws mean to you is your host, Kyle Lorraine.
What is going on, everybody? I'm Kyle, I'm your host, and this is How Is This Legal? Today we have a continuation from a previous episode, the Universal Basic Income. If you listen to that episode, you'll know that we talked a little bit about space law, some different things that are associated with mining precious minerals in space and stuff like that. I found it to be really interesting, so I wanted to do a follow-up episode with my guest from that episode, Mr. Tom Slayton. If you're a loyal listener, you'll recognize Tom's voice and his stunning intellect as we go through the intergalactic legal system. So, Tom, how you doing today, buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me back on, Kyle. I appreciate it.
No problem, man. I'm really been looking forward to this episode because I think it's a pretty interesting topic, and oddly enough, I've been hearing more and more about it since we last did our episode. Just some different things and random articles and stuff like that with the space race just heating up. I believe we talked about this a little bit last time, but could you go ahead and just give us a sort of a brief overview of some of the laws that are currently not in space, but some of the laws that apply to space at this time?
Yeah, sure. So I'm gonna walk you through. There's 3 laws / treaties that kind of govern what's going on in space right now. But after that, it's all going to be speculation because, as you're about to find out, there really is no law in space. So the first one, it's called the Outer Space Treaty, and it actually has a much longer name. It's like the activities of outer space, celestial bodies, yada, yada, yada. Really long name. Everyone calls it the Outer Space Treaty. That was ratified in 1967, and it just sets out some very basic principles. But the important thing about it is that pretty much all major spacefaring nations have signed on to this treaty, so they agree to abide by the terms of the treaty, and that's the United States, Russia, Japan, China, Canada, the United Kingdom, etc. If a country has a space program, they have signed on to this treaty. So what the treaty does is it just sets some very broad boundaries of what you can and cannot do in space. Things like space is free for all to explore. No one can make a sovereign claim to any celestial body. And this one's important. Space activities must be for the benefit of all mankind. So while vague, it's going to get important a little bit later in our conversation. You can't put nuclear weapons into space. And individual nations are responsible for any damage they do in space, which basically means that the United States is responsible for anything Elon Musk does while he is up there. So that's the first piece of space law, and that's an international treaty. Now, the second piece of space law is called the Moon Agreement, and the Moon Agreement came about 10 years after the Outer Space Treaty. And it specifically came about because people were concerned that the Outer Space Treaty really didn't have any teeth to it, and it didn't cover nearly as much as it should. And that's understandable, because in 1967, I know we had already landed on the moon because Kennedy was dead by 67, but we were still in our infancy in space travel, so we didn't really know what we could and couldn't do up there. So the Moon Agreement is not ratified by any major spacefaring countries, which means that the Moon Agreement is essentially useless, but it's still important to talk about. It basically wanted to establish a set of laws for outer space that parroted the laws of the sea. It's not maritime law, it's the laws of the sea. And the laws of the sea, essentially, it's another treaty. It sets boundaries, it sets passageway, right-of-way for non-military vessels, and it also grants controls of minerals that are off coastal nations. So what the Moon Agreement wanted to do for outer space was to ban any military use of celestial bodies, so kind of taking it a step further than the Outer Space Treaty. It did say that you could still test weapons and build bases, but basically a country couldn't wage war against another country while in space. So it also said that it also banned exploration and use without approval or benefits from other states. So that part that I said was important before about the Outer Space Treaty, about to the benefit of all mankind, it made that a little more specific. It also declared that you must notify the Secretary General of the UN if any celestial activities and discoveries developed thanks to those activities. So basically said you had to be open about everything. Again, it reiterated that you can't claim sovereignty to any celestial body. And it banned the ownership of extraterrestrial property unless it's an international organization or government, basically saying no private company can go up there and say, hey, this is mine. And that all makes sense. Those are all very reasonable requests that you would want, and I think most of us would agree that, yeah, that's probably the best way going forward. However, no one signed it. India signed it, but they never ratified it. Mexico signed it and ratified it. I don't think Mexico has a space program. I'm sure Mexico has a space program. I just don't know what they're doing in space. And there was one other country that was non-spacefaring that signed it. But basically, the thing's kind of pointless because Russia, the United States, Japan, China, Canada, and the United Kingdom all have said we are not interested in this at all. But it's still important because we're still looking for a framework, and what a lot of legal scholars and people interested in this field will do is point to the Moon Agreement and say, why don't we ratify that? Why don't we sign that? Because that would solve a lot of these questions that we have. And there's one more law I want to talk about, and this one kind of throws a wrench in everything. So the full name is Spurring Private Aerospace Competitiveness and Entrepreneurship Act, or the Space Act, which I'd like to know how long it took them to figure out an acronym that they can call it the Space Act. But yeah, they did it. And this act was passed in the United States in 2015, and like most acts, it was brought about by lobbyists, specifically a company that I just recently heard of called Planetary Resources. And basically what the Space Act does is it allows U.S. citizens to engage in commercial exploration and exploitation of space resources, water, and minerals. It explicitly says that the act does not assert sovereignty or exclusive rights over any celestial body, but the language of the act sure makes it seem like you're allowing private companies to go up there and maybe not assert sovereignty, but just start taking stuff. Which, if we go back to property theories, first in time kind of thing, it definitely makes it seem like this is now whichever private company gets there first. They might not be saying, we are asserting our sovereignty over this, but they are saying, hey, this is ours now. So, and there's been a lot of pushback, understandably so, because a lot of people are saying, hey, wait a minute, this is violating the Outer Space Treaty, which you guys are a party to. There's some debate about whether it does or does not. The people who say it does not violate the Outer Space Treaty say asteroids aren't celestial bodies. Well, the definition of celestial body is any natural body outside of Earth's atmosphere. So I'm pretty sure an asteroid is a celestial body. But that's still an argument they like to make. But what the opponents of this bill say is that it directly runs counter to the Outer Space Treaty's passage that space must be for the benefit of all mankind. And the Space Act clearly does not say that. It says private companies can go up there and take what resources they need and use them to their own benefit. And going back to planetary resources, this is all, it's important now, but it's becoming even more important because planetary resources on their website, I looked at their mission statement, and by 2020, they will be launching their first spacecrafts to probe asteroids to determine what they can find. And they're mainly looking for water and minerals. Water they're going to look for first, and that's for two reasons. First is because you need water to sustain life. So if you can find water somewhere, it's a lot easier to exploit that than having water sent back and forth between Earth and wherever you happen to be. But also, water is also important in another respect. And that's that it actually makes rocket fuel, apparently. I have no idea.
shit.
Yeah, I have no idea how. I read it. I didn't understand it. Something about hydrogen and oxygen. And just, I mean, I don't know how they're going to do this, but they assure me they can do it. So I'm just going to believe them. I'm going to go.
So is the idea if they find water somewhere else, they can potentially generate rocket fuel, like once they're already in space to explore further?
That's what I would assume. You also probably, if you know there's water up there, you can save money by not sending your rocket up with the rocket fuel needed to go back down.
Gotcha.
At least
It's quite the gamble, though.
yeah, I know. I would not feel comfortable doing it. Also, you got to think, what's the liability insurance for these employers if it's a private company sending people up into space? Now, I'm sure that you sign away a lot of your rights when you go up there. But what if it's human error? What if it's not just you're in space, shit happens, people die? What if it's, there was something, the company was negligent? You got to have insurance for that, I would assume, unless you really just sign away all your rights. And, even if the company's negligent, you're not in trouble for it. But I don't know. It's just a side question. The insurance on this has got to be astronomical. So, yeah, that's just a basic outline of where we're at now. Oh, and back to planetary resources. They're going up in 2020, but they want to begin mining in 2025. So we're 7 years out, 6.5 years out. And as just this brief rundown shows you, no one really knows what's going on with property rights in space. Planetary Resources obviously saw the Space Act as a huge win. I think the CEO even called it like the greatest property rights act of all time or something. But the international community is not happy about it. And specifically those who have spent a good deal amount of time learning about space law and who do see this as a very obvious violation of the Outer Space Treaty. So just right off the bat, we don't have enough laws to really we don't have enough laws to determine who should get what when it comes to mining in outer space. And the one law that everyone in the world is supposed to abide by, everyone's interpreting in a different way. And it's also 60 years old, 50 years old. And I don't think the United States has any problem violating it. And I don't think Russia has any problem violating it. I don't think China or Japan would have any problem violating it, especially in light of the Space Act, which was the United States saying, we're going to do what we want. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, kind of, when it comes to all of this. Now, there's also there's another interesting thing. We brought this up briefly last time, but, are there going to be criminal laws in space? What's going to happen if there's a dispute or a fight in space? And I did some research on that, and it turns out we don't really know what's going to happen then either. But at least I got two interesting stories out of it. So I was directed to look at Antarctica's laws, because Antarctica, there's like 7 countries that apparently claim Antarctica, even though it's not, I guess, a serious claim. The United States and Russia aren't 2 of them. But the United States and Russia also says we aren't claiming Antarctica right now, but we might later. So anyways, Antarctica is basically, there are no formal set of laws. So what's supposed to happen, according to the Antarctica Treaty, is that when something happens in Antarctica, you go by the rules of whatever country's base it is. So if you're at Belgium's base and there's the violation of a law, then you would look to Belgium's laws to see what the punishment is, to see how you handle it, yada yada. Now, the problem occurs is what happens when you're off a base? What happens when you're at a campsite? What happens when you're moving from base to base? And this has actually happened before. Once in the mid-'90s, a guy attacked another guy with a hammer and killed him. At least that's what I assume from the research, that he did, in fact, die. And what they did was they locked him in a shed and basically said, we're going to keep you in here until we figure out what we do with you. And when they finally got him out of Antarctica, nothing happened to him. No charges were filed. No one wanted to mess with it. That's basically what I found, or at least what what it seems like happened is that no one wanted to dig through the legal weeds and determine how exactly we're going to charge this guy and under what law we're going to charge him. So nothing happened to him. There's another one, a much more prominent case in the early 2000s. A guy from New Zealand, I believe. No, he might have been Australian. New Zealand or Australia. He was killed, possibly killed. He died of methane poisoning. And it was never really determined whether that was an accident, which the accident didn't seem likely. I guess they had concluded that it wasn't suicide because the guy was young, recently in a relationship, no money problems. He had a really good life. So they determined it wasn't suicide. But again, nothing happened as a result of this. And actually, there was some talk between the United States and New Zealand about what they should do, but they never came to a compromise about what they should do. And it brought up this huge loophole in the Antarctica Treaty. And in the Antarctica Treaty, under these situations, companies have to talk. Countries have to talk to each other. And then they're supposed to come to a resolution. But what happens when two countries don't come to a resolution? Well, nothing happens. They just don't come to a resolution. No one gets to stand up and say, I don't care what you say, we're going to do it my way anyways. Doesn't work like that. So this case in the mid-2000s, someone died in Antarctica and charges were never filed. There was never any attempt to bring anyone to justice for this crime. And we kind of just swept it under the rug. And we swept it under the rug because these things are so uncommon that it's easier to just turn away from it than actually address it and confront it. And so when people, and a few people have said this, that let's look to the Antarctica Treaty when we're talking about specifically about setting up a uniform criminal code in space or having some sort of criminal laws in space. But the Antarctica Treaty clearly doesn't work. And so, and I know I'm just rambling on now, but I'm going down this whole rabbit hole of how are we going to determine what laws are applicable in space. And every time that I learn about a new law that could work, there's all of these huge holes in it. And we haven't even brought up the fact that, the major difference now is going to be we're on another planet. We're on an asteroid. Communication is not easy. You can't bring somebody to court. You can't arrest somebody. So we're basically in 2025 when Planetary Resources decides to go up there and starts mining. It will literally be the wild, wild west. And I think people should be concerned about that. Because there is nothing the news is going to want to love more than the first space murder. And it'll happen eventually. Maybe not in 2025, but it will happen eventually. And countries need to be able, they need a framework on how to respond to that, on how to bring someone to justice so that there's not vigilante justice, and so that it doesn't escalate conflicts on Earth. Because it's the last thing you want to happen is to have two companies that fly under the flag of different countries get into a dispute, solve it themselves in a possibly violent way, and then how do the countries on Earth act? And it's going to be really, really interesting, and I don't think anyone has those answers yet. And the worst part about this is there's been very little done to try to figure out where to even begin to find those answers. And that's the most concerning thing to me is that no one's talking about this. No one wants to fix the Outer Space Treaty. The Moon Agreement, while great, no one wants to ratify it. And I'm beginning to get a little concerned that what should be an amazing achievement for mankind will turn into us looking massively unprepared for something that a lot of people saw coming long before it did. So yeah, I apologize for rambling, but
it's okay. It's interesting stuff. The whole thing with the Space Act that kind of reminds me of like whenever the United States, like every president declares a new capital of Israel, and there's always like a huge protest, and it like affects like an entire part of the world. And it's just kind of nuts that the United States can do that, has that much power that they can set a capital in a different country that they recognize. Therefore, like the rest of the world sort of de facto recognizes it, and it just causes like all this uproar. So I'm thinking especially with the Space Act sort of upending the Outer Space Treaty, it's going to be kind of similar in terms of like the U.S. sort of setting the pace for what they're, like what is okay to claim and what isn't. I could see the U.S. sort of finding like an entire like sort of orbit around a certain planet and be like, this is the United States land, like we're seizing this land or something like that. So I just think it's going to follow a similar pattern as we do with a lot of our other foreign policy, at least in Israel for whatever reason. I always just find that so interesting.
See, what is interesting is that would be directly contrary to the Outer Space Act. The United States cannot claim sovereignty over any piece of land. But what the Space Act allows is for private companies to do it. So I think you're right about that.
So SpaceX will claim sovereignty.
Yes. Elon Musk will go up there and claim sovereignty. And what's anyone else going to do about it? And the answer is nothing. So we do have courts where we're supposed to handle disputes, and like the International Court of Justice, I would assume would be. I actually tried to look up where outer space treaty disputes go. I'm assuming it's the International Court of Justice, but I didn't get a definitive answer. But we're just gonna go with the International Court of Justice. So what would that even look like? How are they going to be able to enforce a ruling? Say Elon Musk is making trillions of dollars off some asteroid he's mining, and the International Court of Justice says, hey, you can't do that. Well, Elon Musk is probably going to say, screw you, yes, I can, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. And the United States is probably going to be like, hey, under our laws, under the Space Act, we gave him authorization to do this. So there might be a lot of disagreements, and there might be a lot of raised voices in the international community. But I think eventually what's going to happen is other countries are just going to start doing the same damn thing. You're going to have Russian Elon Musk, Canadian Elon Musk. You're going to have all of these countries who are just basically going to say, all right, it's time for us to profit off this as well. Because the countries would be profiting off of it because, whatever taxes they get from it, there will be some profit. But it's pretty clear that governments cannot claim sovereignty, and that would be I think that would be met with a lot more force than if Elon Musk came up there and wanted to claim it.
It's kind of a moot point right now, though, because certainly Elon Musk is going to get there faster than the U.S. government or any other government could, or at least more efficiently, and maybe take more advantage of the precious minerals and everything that are already up there. What I thought was interesting, I think Elon Musk is just a fascinating individual. Rightfully so, because he does so many unique things. But like that article I sent you the other day, whenever they launched the Falcon Heavy rocket, there was like a Chinese media outlet that was reporting that the launch of that rocket reaffirmed that the United States is the most powerful country in the world and stuff like that. Like, it's just kind of nuts that how a private company, and I mean it's pretty shrewd drafting, making the Space Act to benefit private companies so much, but it's crazy how much a private company is able to accomplish in such a short amount of time that looks so good on behalf of a government. It's just kind of shocking that he's able to do all these things, and then the United States is sort of praised for it when, the government's not sort of funding anything or doing anything to help him get there. He just happens to live in the United States.
Yeah, I need to do more research on Elon Musk. I'd assume that the government has helped in some respects. I got to believe that there's some oversight along these lines, and there's probably even some grants and other things of that nature. But you brought up the heavy rocket, and I talked about this last time briefly, about how cheap it was compared to other heavy rockets. And I think I referenced this graph. And so I finally found the graph again, and I have the exact figures, and it's absolutely astonishing, especially in light of your comments that China said, the United States it shows why they're such a great country. Well, NASA apparently did not get that memo from Elon Musk, because there's this really cool graph, and it shows the cost of all the heavy rockets and how much it costs to launch them. And so it shows the Saturn V, which was NASA's heavy rocket used between 67 and 73. And that cost about $1.2 billion to launch. So then it shows you SpaceX, or not SpaceX, it shows you the heavy rocket from SpaceX, which cost about $120 million to launch. So a fraction of it, 10%. And so then I was looking at it and I thought, okay, well, maybe, there's a big reason that the SpaceX rockets are so inexpensive compared to the government rockets is they're using reusable boosters. Excuse me. So they're saving a ton of money by not having to build these things from scratch every single time. So then I kept going down the line. I thought, okay, well, the Saturn V was used from 67 to 73. The Heavy rocket was launched in 2018. Surely NASA has caught up by now, and I'm going to see a lower number for their next Heavy rocket. Well, no, of course not. NASA's SLS-1B Heavy rocket, which is supposed to go into use in 2021, is going to cost $1.5 billion to launch. And then if you go a little bit farther, you see the BFR, which I hope stands for Big Fucking Rocket. I didn't look it up. But this is another SpaceX Heavy rocket that's going to be launched in 2022 and is going to cost $8 million to launch. Now, I did a little bit of research, and $8 million is incredibly optimistic. No one thinks it'll actually only cost $8 million. Maybe around the terms 50 to 100. But still a fraction of what NASA is spending to put a similar rocket up into space. And that's why I think we need to talk about space mining so much sooner than other people would think so, is because once countries do start, and I don't know how far behind they are, but once space travel is economically feasible, private companies are going to be scrambling to get up there and mine some of these asteroids, not just for precious metals, but for structural metals as well. And once we're up there and actually exploring, who knows what else we're going to find. But this conversation should have started years ago to determine how property rights are going to work in space. And the launch of the Heavy rocket by SpaceX should put everyone on notice that, hey, the only reason we're not up there drilling right now is because it's not cost efficient. Well, Elon Musk has made it cost efficient. So just something that we really need to keep an eye on. But
There's a big counter argument to that too, though, that the reason it's so much cheaper is because they launched it unmanned in the to make it like inhabitable, or I don't know if it's. I think it's mostly to comply with like NASA regulations and safety regulations and stuff that they have set. So in order to do that, that's what costs the most amount of money in terms of the engineering and making it safe for human travel. But I think it still shows that there's definitely room for improvement from the government's point of view in terms of making it more affordable, because I can't imagine you have another $1.4 billion that you need to put into safety testing. But I think the thing I'm most excited about is when space travel becomes like taking an Uber. Like, there's not going to be many destinations for a long time, but you know now how like it takes so long in order to get to the moon, even though we can see it, even with the technology that we have now, time-wise. You know, like if we would want to go to another solar system, you're looking at so many years of travel. I don't know all the numbers exactly, but I'm excited for when we get to the point when, because I think it's going to happen eventually, just like cars have gotten faster over the years and we're able to drive at higher speeds, you know, so on and so forth. I'm excited for the point when a rocket can get to, say, another solar system or another Earth-like planet that we discover someday in a matter of like a couple hours. It'd be like taking a plane to Florida. Then I think we're going to see a lot more regulatory oversight of these like space jets. You know, like are they going to have like a sort of like a Southwest type jet where it's like a little bit cheaper, but you know, you're still getting to the same spot. You just have less leg room, or you know, I'm excited to see what that looks like, and if that's just going to be, I think that's going to be spurred a lot by private companies too, in terms of scrambling to sort of catch up with that. I think we're a ways off of that, but I do think that once we get into sort of exploring the minerals and all the resources in space, that I think we're going to find another planet that's similar to ours. I don't know. I just can't help but believe that we're the only planet in the world that's in the universe that's like this. Like, there's got to be another Earth. And, you know, what do they look like? What do they do? Do they have languages? How do they communicate? Do they have similar technology? Are they like in their Stone Age? You know, I feel like there's more of us out there.
Oh yeah, no, there's without a doubt.
Might be taking a detour in the conversation, but I think it's relevant.
No, that's fine. I do think it's relevant. So I read this book years ago, and I can't remember what else was in it. It's called Chariot of the Gods, and I'm sure I heard the name from watching Ancient Aliens or something on the History Channel. But it gave me the best argument I've ever heard for the existence of aliens. And it's not the pyramids, it's not, you know, weird cave drawings. It's nothing like that. It's sheer size. And it talked about, it broke everything down very nice. There's 100 billion planets out there. Well, let's say that 1% of those 100 billion.
How do we even quantify how? Not to cut you off, but how do we quantify how many planets are out there? Like, if we haven't discovered them, like, how does that process sort of work? Do you know anything about that?
No, I have no idea. When people start talking about science, I generally just believe them because I can't wrap my hand around any of that. But I do think that we've at least established that the known universe is in the hundreds of billions of celestial bodies, whether that be planets, stars, whatever it may be. And at least the way that this was laid out to me, that there was this X amount of planets. I think it was 100 billion.
I mean, I believe it too, because I have no idea how it works either. I'm just curious.
Well, I think, and I guess they counted stars. Now, I don't know much about stars, but I guess a star could be habitable. I don't know. I really don't know. Okay. Anyways, again, science confuses me. But so they broke it down that there was, 100 billion planets out there. And let's say that 1% of those planets are even capable of holding life, what we know life to be. And so then you still have this ridiculously high number of planets, 1 billion planets, whatever it was. And the numbers were bigger than this originally because I'm already starting to doubt how low this have gotten. But basically what it did is it kept breaking it down. 1% of the total number of planets, 1% of that total number of planets that can hold life have some form of living organism. Not intelligent life, but some form of living organism. And that number was huge. Even if we're taking small conservative estimates, just 1% of 1%, you have this huge, huge number. And then you even go further down and still, okay, how about only 1% of that 1% has intelligent life on it? And you're still in the millions of planets that it could potentially be. And it broke it all down using the most conservative estimates, taking 1% of everything, going from planets to planets that can hold life, to planets that have life, and to planets that have intelligent life. And the number is massive. And it gets to the point where you're done reading it and you think, there's no fucking way in hell we're the only ones out there. There's too many planets. There's simply too many planets for this to be the only one that life can survive on. And I don't know if we're going to find little green men. I don't know if we're going to find, intelligent being. But there's aliens out there, whether that just be, crocodiles and reptiles and all that shit on another planet. It's still an alien. So there's definitely life out there. And I think that it's likely that there's intelligent life out there. Now, I don't think we'll ever find that out in our lifetime because we've still discovered such a small percentage of the universe. It really is the last great frontier, and no one really seems to care about it anymore. I was really happy when Elon Musk got so much attention for launching the heavy rocket, and I think he even got more attention because of his Tesla that got started, it got sent
You
up
just
to
threw
space.
up there.
Yeah. But I really appreciated it because I think that it brought attention back to space for a minute.
It like reignited the space race in a lot of respects too.
Yes, absolutely. And I do, I think we need to go whatever it takes, whether we put people on Mars, we put people back on the moon, even if it's not a pressing need of ours. We need to spark the space race again. We need to get countries to collaborate and to truly start exploring, to take that next step and figuring what else is out there. And I think it'll be important down the line. Now we're going to get into some doomsday. I'm not going to get into some doomsday stuff, but eventually we need to be prepared for we need to find other habitable planets that eventually generations from now will be viable to start forming colonies. There's no way that we spend another 3,000 years on Earth and don't even consider expanding into other colonies. We don't have a limitless supply of materials here. It's worked out well for the past 75 million years or whatever it is. But I think eventually, if not just out of sheer curiosity, the Earth, mankind will need to start exploring. And I think we could be the beginning of that. The beginning was technically in the 60s. but I would like for our generation to be a new beginning to that, I guess.
I wonder if there's, because I always think that the way we're going to discover life, I don't think it's going to be like it's in the movies where, like in Independence Day, where they just bring the mothership and sort of plant down somewhere in like Nebraska. I don't think it's going to happen like that. I think there's other worlds out there that are doing the same thing we are. Maybe they're a bit more united, more efficient in terms of like not sort of trying to beat other countries on their planet. Maybe they're just trying to be the planet that is able to explore the most because maybe they have the same belief. And I think that they're going to have something like maybe a piece of a rocket, or maybe they put a car up there in their solar or their orbit. And I think something like that, or like some piece of something that's going to like be clearly man-made, is going to make its way into our orbit. And I think that's how we're going to discover that there's other life out there. I think it's going to be either like we discover another rocket ship when we're in space, or something else makes its way to Earth that no one can claim, or nobody knows where it really came from, maybe a satellite, something like that. Because I tend to believe that there's, just from the sheer number too, that there's another planet out there, and if they're intelligent life, they're going to have to be, at least I would assume, there's curious and want to explore the sort of the universe around them as much as we want to. It's so strange to talk about because it's so easy to get wrapped up in like just mundane shit even in the United States, between like different states arguing with each other, and then you have different countries arguing with each other, just like some of the laws we're talking about, the treaties and whatnot. But there could potentially be like other planets out there that have answers to all the shit we're looking for. Like, what if a planet has like some kind of herb or something like that that's the cure to cancer, or that's the that we can cure diabetes with, or whatever, like reverse maybe some mental disorders and stuff like that. And we're too busy arguing about like marijuana laws between states and different oil rights and stuff like that between different countries to notice that there could be more out there. But it is one of those things too where we know so little about it that it's far-fetched in the same respect, which makes it so interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I think you're spot on in a lot of that. And I do think that's actually how I became interested in property laws in space, was after Mars announced that it had discovered water. And I wasn't thinking about mining at all. I was thinking about microorganisms. And imagine a company found a microorganism in space and brought it down and started doing tests on it, and it turns out it cures cancer. Who makes that money? Excuse me. Is it the, who profits off that? Because someone profits off that. And so that kind of got me down this road. And then I realized how much money was in these asteroids and celestial bodies, and I realized that that's where the real disputes will be. But in terms of how we're going to contact, or how extraterrestrials will contact us, I think it's going to be so there's this program called SETI, and SETI. I assume it's search for extraterrestrials, something with an
Intelligence, maybe.
Yeah, that's actually probably it. And it's actually cool because you can download the program and you can let SETI use your computer to help, but it's basically just a search for extraterrestrial signals from outer space. It's a search for some form of life. And I don't know how, again, science...
You signed up for this, didn't you?
I did for a little while. And I thought it was cool. When I was just sitting there playing video games or something, I'd leave my laptop on and let them use my computer.
Could you imagine if it just started going nuts?
Oh, it would have been hysterical. I would have loved it. But it's just this massive computer program that searches outer space for unfamiliar signals. And I think that's how we're going to do it. I think we're going to get a radio beacon from, light years away that we pick up, and we determine after much research that it couldn't have come from anything. There's actually, I was running out the door, so I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing, but there was one of those clickbaity headlines the other day on some space website I visit, and it was, what did it say? We found a signal from the same spot in the universe multiple times, which apparently doesn't happen ever. I read enough of the article to realize that it's probably not aliens, but those are the kinds of things that we're looking for. Is there a signal that comes from the same place twice? If there is, okay, what can that be? And I think once you start checking off boxes of it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, we're eventually going to be able to deduce that, okay, this might be aliens. And I think then is where do we go next? And I do think this information will eventually be released to the public because at least I would hope that it would, once scientists determined this, that it must be extraterrestrials, I would hope that the response wouldn't be whatever nation found it decides to respond. I would hope that there would be some coordination. If the United States, if it was the United States that found it, I'd hope that Russia and China and Japan and the UK and Canada would all be filled in, and all of NATO, pretty much everyone, and said, hey, this is no longer a United States issue. This is an Earth issue. How are we going to respond? We would like to send a signal back to it. We don't know what it is. We could be provoking something. We could be, just saying, hey, how's it going? But we want to attempt to make contact, and I think it would be very important for countries to come together.
What language do you think we ought to send this transmission in? Do you think they speak English? Do you think they speak like Chinese? Like, there's a whole other problem there. Do we send it in Morse code?
It's interesting. I would hope that they'd send it in something. So
I would assume it'd be like Chinese.
Well, it could be. And if it's an intelligent, I'd assume that you'd first send it in every language. And if it's an intelligent life form that's advanced from us, they'd probably be able to. They'd probably already know that we're there, and they'd probably be able to get some information.
They could probably, if they can go that far, I wonder if they could like probe like a computer and like sort of like if something was in a cloud, maybe like, a server somewhere, if they could like probe that and pull information from that and be like, oh, okay, this is all the same scripture. This must be their language. Or like if they could find like a Rosetta Stone somewhere, I can't help but think like another world is just so like intelligent because that's what's spoon fed to us in the movies and stuff like that. I could be completely off, but you always just think, I still kind of believe that there's something out there that would be able to like sort of rip information from us if they needed to, based on how interconnected our world is. I could be completely off though.
No, but it's interesting to think about. And you would, if we're making contact with, I can't believe that we're the most advanced life form in outer space. I just can't believe it. I have to believe that there is something more advanced than us out there. But I think probably what you would do originally is you'd send a series of messages, maybe that doesn't actually have anything on it, beeps, whatever it is, that would just ensure that whoever got it knew it couldn't be anything else but made from an intelligent being. That it would have to be that the first message would just be, hey, we're here. And that's just a series of beeps in a way that can't be from a star dying. Like, there's all these ways that you can make, that you can, these beacons that are picked up in space, these noises that we get. I thought there wasn't even noise in space, but apparently they're picking stuff up. So we'd have to make sure that whatever we're sending out, it can't just be, we can't, it doesn't sound like an imitation of something like a star exploding or something that occurs on a regular basis. It would have to be unique, just to say we're here too. But then, yeah, you're right. If both species were about the same level of advance, where we couldn't just go into their cloud and get all their Rosetta Stone and figure out how they talked, how do you communicate? And that's a really interesting question. And again, I would just like to say that I hope that question is not answered by a group of scientists in a small building who have been sworn to secrecy. I hope that question is answered by the global community. And I'm not saying that they have to fill in me before they send it, but I'd like to know that there was some collaboration before a message was sent. But yeah, no, it's all fascinating stuff. And I don't know if we're going to be there in our lifetimes. I sure hope that we are. But I think definitely in our children's and grandchildren's lifetime, there will no longer be that question of what else is out there. I think we'll at least know of something else out there. Maybe not all of it, but we'll have some idea.
Yeah, and then maybe that would be when my idea would be a little bit more viable for the fast space travel or the airline to another planet. Maybe like our kids or grandkids' lifetime, where they can just go visit somewhere else because, maybe it's like one country that's just like a giant tropical island or something that, we only have a little bit of here on Earth. But yeah, it is super fascinating in terms of what might be out there and sort of like how they would communicate. Because then I wonder if like how dolphins can communicate by sending like waves or, whatever, where they, I don't know like what the correct term is, but you know what I'm talking about, where they can send like brain waves to each other. I wonder if like maybe this species can do that, and maybe they have a similar makeup or like a similar structure in terms of like they're humans, but they can access more of their brain, so they don't need to talk. They just send signals to each other, kind of like dolphins, and maybe they would try to communicate with us, and we wouldn't. It would sort of go over our heads, so to speak. We wouldn't be able to interpret this message, and like our form of scripture would be too like archaic for them, or something along those lines. It makes you wonder what they're like, or because maybe it's just crocodiles somewhere and they wouldn't be able to communicate with us, or maybe there's like a planet that's run by primates or something like that that are so advanced that they skipped or they like overthrew the humans, like in Planet of the Apes or something like that. I don't know.
That would be very cool. I like that idea.
It'd be terrifying.
It would be terrifying. But you brought up the dolphins, and it made me think. So anyone who's enjoyed this episode or kind of like stuff like this, I encourage you to Google the top 10 unsolved underwater sounds. It truly is some crazy shit. That there are quite a few sounds that happen in the depths of the ocean that we have no idea how they originate, and it's kind of freaky. There's one, my personal favorite is the lonely whale, and they're pretty sure this was a whale, but it's just this whale that's for like 50 years gone on the same path and is called out for a mating. It's actually really sad, but has always tried to mate with another whale and never been successful. And I know they did like a documentary on it recently. I don't think anyone's actually ever seen the whale, but the same sound always pops up around the same time, and that's what scientists have figured out that was. But there's a ton of other sounds that are just astronomically loud, and we have no idea what they come from. There's speculation, like it could be, underwater earthquake, or like plates shifting, and you're just hearing the reverberation from that. But yeah, if you like that kind of speculation of what else is out there, start looking at what's here on Earth as well, because there's some weird stuff that's just completely, I said space was the last frontier, but we really don't know anything about the ocean at this point either. Like less than that actually. I think it's like 10% of the sea floor has actually been plotted or been explored at all, and maybe even less than that.
Don't they call it the alien deep when you get down that far too?
Yeah, and I don't. There's like the Marina Trench, which I think is the farthest down. I really don't know a lot about this subject. I just know that it hasn't been explored. We don't know exactly what's down there. It's very hard to even get down there. I know some billionaire tried to do it. I forget his name, but God, what is his name? I don't know. But yeah, there's so much to be explored, and like you said before, we're just bickering up here about pot, and it's so stupid. It's absolutely stupid. I said this in the last time. If aliens visit and we don't get our shit together, then I hope it is an Independence Day, and I hope Will Smith does not save the day, because if aliens visit and they're not violent, and we still want to bicker amongst ourselves, then this planet is too stupid to survive, and you might as well just end it, because it's but we're still ways off from that. So I still have some hope in humanity that we will bond together as one, but I don't know.
I think a important component of it, sort of going back to these treaties and whatnot, and the laws that would govern it, is the rest of the world getting on the same page. And like, while I think it's awesome that the United States sort of went rogue with the Space Act and is able to spur a lot of the space race conversation and exploration like we're talking about here, I still think, and I'm sure you agree, that there needs to be a uniform set of sort of guidelines of, what do we do if we encounter someone? Like you said, does the United States just communicate with them, or are they obligated to inform the rest of the world, which I think would be a good idea, before we send communication back, or before we would sort of launch a mission? Do we have like a representative from each country that's in this treaty, sort of like Congress, be present to make these decisions, and possibly send like an astronaut to go explore this other world, or to make contact with someone else if someone shows up? Like, who's greeting them? There's just so many unanswered questions. And I think that's one of the reasons that there's so many movies about this, and a lot of them have the same plot where, something shows up and they don't know how to handle it, because we don't really have anything in place to handle it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And what I would do if I was in charge of all this, what I would do is basically say, All right, the SpaceX stays. If you want to go up there and mine, you can go up there and mine. That applies to any private company in the world. However, we still need to respect the Outer Space Treaty, and a portion of your profits are going to go to a pool that is distributed evenly to every country so that technically everyone's benefiting from it. You're fulfilling your obligations under the Outer Space Treaty. And I think once you get those lobbyists and the businessmen who want to profit, once you make them happy, then you start to work out the laws like a uniform criminal code, laws of first contact. Then you start really working on, okay, now that we're up there, how are we going to regulate everything? But I think first you let those people go make money. That's what the United States is about. It's a capitalistic society. I'm all for it. Let them go make money, and let people from other countries go make money too. Obviously, we're going to have to work out some way of saying, okay, what's a valid claim? Can you just look up with your telescope, see a plot of land, and say, hey, that's mine. I'm going to go mine it soon. Probably not. You probably actually have to get there first and set up some sort of base. Once that's there, it's yours. You pay a percentage of what you mine just to have the opportunity to do this, and then you bring in the laws shortly thereafter. But yeah, I think the only way that you get to that second part, I think a lot of people want to solve what would happen prior to us going into space, which is really smart. But the problem is you're going to need to get the lobbyists out of this. You're going to need to get anyone who has a financial stake out of this prior to sitting down and talking about those laws. And the easiest way to do that is just say, go for it. Go make some money. But understand that pretty soon we're going to have a uniform set of laws, and you will have to abide by them when they come in, and all disputes will be governed by such and such a body. And I think then you might have some success. But what I think is going to happen is we're going to do the first part, which is just let people go up there and make money, and then we're just going to kind of figure it out as we go. So whether it works out or not, maybe. It's worked out in Antarctica so far, except for the 2 times that I brought up. But I would just be a little more careful in space, where the international community can't come down as harshly on you in space. And again, it's going to be the Wild West, and I hope we're prepared for it.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, and I think a big problem with it too is that if we do this sort of tax system like you're talking about, what's to stop a company like SpaceX from being like, all right, that's fine, we'll abide by it, with their fingers crossed, and then sort of like a catch me if you can kind of thing, because, what if they develop a rocket that can carry more than they say it can, and they're bringing back like extra minerals that they're not paying a tax on or whatever, or I think stuff like that would be more probable than sort of like murders and stuff like that, because if you have 5 crew members go up and only 4 come back, that's pretty noticeable. But I still think there's going to be people that try to hide from that sort of tax because they get so used to the idea that it's the Wild West and they can make as much money as they want, and then all of a sudden they come back from a mission and it's like, hey, we're going to need 30% of this, which could be like a few $1 trillion if these things are as valuable as people are projecting. So I think that might be where the tribunals and the world courts have the most action, so to speak, in sort of developing a body kind of like the IRS that has so much power in order to regulate that, because I could definitely see that being the biggest problem.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that they do that. Companies do that here on Earth.
Where they send it to offshore accounts, like the Apple thing that just happened not too long ago.
Exactly, and that's why I would think that if you're paying out every country, if every country has so the problem with just allowing companies to go up there and do what they will is you're kind of screwing over smaller countries that don't have that opportunity. And yet they're still mankind. So when we look back at the Outer Space Treaty...
so you would split it across every country, not just people that are a part of the treaty?
Yeah, no,
okay.
I think you have to, because unless we're just going to say, hey, we're throwing the Outer Space Treaty out, which it would kind of be difficult to do, you do have to look at that clause that says that all space activities must be done for the benefit of all mankind.
Okay.
And so I think maybe if these, like the countries that are these tax safe havens, if they stand to lose money by being a safe haven, then maybe there's a way you work it out that they'll want to enforce these laws too, that they'll want to say, no, you can't be a safe haven here because the money you're hiding, I'm losing out on. And yeah, it probably will be, like you said, there could very well be a lot of money these companies will have to hike over in tax. But this is also, outer space. Like, we don't own outer space. This is no longer Earth. This is no longer within anyone's, this isn't, hey, that's my planet, I can do what I want. No, outer space is kind of everybody's. And until someone wants to start planting flags, which would be a terrible idea, I think companies are going to have to understand that, hey, we're still going to make way more money than we're putting in. This is still going to be incredibly profitable for us. And eventually, so one of the laws, it was a suggested law. I forget the name of it. I'll come up with it. But it had an idea. It was the Space Settlement Prize Act, and it basically it would grant claims to companies, and the size of the claim was based on which company came in first. So their theory was that the first company to want to go up there and mine is going to be shelling out enormous amounts of money just to get this thing up and running. They're going to have to go through all of these issues because they're the first ones doing it. Well, the 100th company that comes down the line, they're not entitled to that big of a claim. They're going to get, a few hundred square miles on Mars because it's already been streamlined. It's already been basically you're putting up much less. Why are we going to reward you with more? And so I think eventually, the real people that would get hurt would be the first companies that go up that do put in, this massive amounts of money into it. And you do have to some way accommodate them, give them, the first drilling rights, the best drilling rights, whatever it is. But then the companies that come further on down the line, they can't complain about as much about the tax because they're still going to be making money hand over fist. And again, this is outer space. It doesn't belong to anybody, and it shouldn't belong to anybody. So I think it's just it's going to be a cost of doing business thing, and I think companies will be fine by it because they'll still be making plenty of money.
Yeah, and realistically, by the time something like this would get established, the heavy hitters, like you were saying, like SpaceX or Boeing or other companies that have a real shot at getting up there and getting a lot of resources would probably have made so much money by the time the tax is put in place, they might not care anymore. And then anyone else entering is going to be like, all right, well, I have to pay this tax, but I can still make a few $1 trillion this year, and as opposed to, a couple million I could make mining minerals on Earth. So it probably will be one of those things they don't take into account too much or really care too much after a while. I just think it's sort of on a fundamental level, it's impossible to legislate for stuff like this, and because it would have to affect the rest of the world. It's impossible to do it sort of proactively because how do you convince the rest of the world that probably doesn't care? I'm sure there's a lot of countries that don't care about this as much, especially the smaller countries that have no prospect of ever going to space. They're not going to be interested in helping with this endeavor, so they're not going to have an interest in making this a proactive or prospective sort of set of laws. So really the only way you can do it is in a reactive sense like we do everything else. And that was the only thing I was kind of getting at, where it could be a potential problem, but spread it out across the rest of the world, including like all the smaller countries like Jamaica or, Caribbean islands, stuff like that. That makes a lot more sense. And I could see where there'd be, because if you have nowhere to hide the money at that point, then you eliminate a lot of the problem.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess, so my whole basis of spreading it out was all premised on the fact of this clause in the Outer Space Treaty. And I suppose now that I think about it more, we could get rid of the Outer Space Treaty. The problem is that any treaty that we create to put back in its place, you need Russia, you need the United Kingdom, you need the EU, and you need Japan and China. And you need all of them to be in agreement. And that is very, very, and Canada. But that's going to be very, very hard to do. And I don't think we'd be able to get it done in time I don't think we're going to be able to get it done in the next 7 years. If Planetary Resources is correct, that they will be mining in 2025, we simply will not be able to have a new treaty laid out, signed, and ratified in those 7 years, especially with relations now between the United States and Russia, the EU and Russia, China and the United States to a certain extent. So, and that's why I proposed the tax, because I think that satisfies current agreements, and it'd still be implemented in a way that this is extremely profitable for companies.
And everybody likes money.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of how you sell it: is, hey, everyone's going to make money. Just do it, and be ready for some regulation. We're going to need criminal laws. We're going to need, and that's the most interesting thing about it, is you said 5 astronauts go up, 4 astronauts go down. Well, whoever killed the 5th astronaut, who's bringing them to court? Because you have to have jurisdiction. and no one would have jurisdiction over where the crime was committed. That's what happened to the guy in Antarctica, the guy that they just let go, beat the other guy with the hammer. What laws do what laws do you charge him under? Who brings him to court? And if it's not on a base that is, flying under a country's flag, then you're kind of you're kind of screwed if you want to bring justice, because it's going to be really easy for that case to get thrown out in court. So even if those instances don't happen very often, it's important to have a strong set of laws in place for when they do happen.
Or certainly have the conversation started before we get to that point. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm pretty interested to see where we end up with this, and I think if SpaceX can build that rocket for $8 million, which, like you were saying, is incredibly optimistic. If that does happen, I think that mining might be in the cards a little bit sooner, because that was 2022 that he was talking about that, right?
Yeah, it was the launch price was $8 million, but then the big part about that is it goes into what how much it costs to send items up into space, like what per pound or per kilogram, what's the cost of sending materials into space, and what's the cost of bringing them down. And so that's where that launch price really factored in. Was it reduced those two costs by vast amounts, where, I do think that it's eventually they'd be stupid not to use it to start bringing stuff back or sending mining equipment up.
I wonder what the mining equipment's going to look like, too. Do you think it's just going to be like claws that they have on the end of spaceships that go out, grab the asteroids, and then sort of suck them into the machine? Or since there's not any gravity, if something's not in orbit and just kind of floating there, can you just kind of go out, tether to the ship, and then grab it and get pulled back in?
See, I'd assume you'd land on the asteroid. I would assume you'd land on the asteroid, and then you'd have some big-ass drills. I'm envisioning
like a spider type thing, like landing on it and then having a bunch of drills going in.
Yeah. No, I'm absolutely envisioning. God, why can't I think of the movie? Space Cowboys, was that it?
I'm not sure. I've never seen that one.
I think it's Space Cowboys, where it's a deep sea mining crew, and they all go up there. Bruce Willis. Spoiler alert, guys. He goes up there and drills. There's an asteroid coming for Earth. He drills a big old hole, puts a bomb in there, blows the thing up. That might not be Space Cowboys. There's two movies. I always get them confused. But most people will know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that's what I keep envisioning, and that's just a movie, so it's probably wrong. But you never know. It will be really interesting to see what they look like.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me, and hopefully I'm writing another commentary, The Celestial Gold Rush. So that should be done in the next couple of months. You'll have to give me a shout out once I finish it and get it published.
For sure, and hopefully, I think it'd be awesome, because I want to keep this podcast going for a while. We're going to have to do multiple episodes like this, because I think it's going to be an area of law that sort of heats up. Maybe not as quickly as we would hope, but in the next few years. So there's certainly more episodes like this to come, and I'm really excited because I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to keep researching it, so hopefully I'll have something new to add next time.
And until next time, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoyed the show. Share it with your family and friends, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to How Is This Legal? If you enjoyed the show, help others find us by clicking the subscribe button, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, and sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Come back next time to find out how is this legal?